What if I told you a self-proclaimed HOA Karen tried to control my lakeside cabin, called the cops on me, and 5 weeks later, I had her entire fake HOA legally banned from existence? She thought she ran the neighborhood. She didn't know I owned the land and the law. There's something sacred about silence, the kind you only find near a lake, with the wind brushing the trees and the water holding your reflection like a secret. That's why I bought this cabin, tucked at the edge of a private lake, surrounded by thick pine trees and no visible neighbors for at least half a mile. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. I'd worked hard for this. Years of city noise, deadlines, and stress had pushed me to finally cash in my savings and invest in peace. According to county records, the land was unincorporated, meaning no city restrictions, and most importantly, no HOA. I even made sure to have my attorney comb through the title and deed, all clear. No associations, no rules, no karens.or, so I thought. It was my second day moving in. I had just finished stacking some lumber on the porch when I heard footsteps crunching down my gravel driveway. I looked up and saw her, a woman in her 50s, wearing designer sunglasses, yoga pants, and carrying a clipboard like it was a badge. She walked with that specific kind of entitled energy you could smell from 100 feet away. "Excuse me," she called out, before even reaching the steps. "You can't park your truck on the grass. That's a violation." I raised an eyebrow. "Violation of what?" She smiled, smug and slow. "Lakeside Preservation Association by Section 4. No unauthorized parking on natural areas." I blinked. I didn't sign up for any HOA. This property isn't under one. She tilted her head, as if she pitied my ignorance. "You must be new. The association was recently formed. It covers this whole side of the lake now. If you read the packet we left in your mailbox, you'd know." I hadn't checked the mailbox yet. I was still unpacking dishes. "I didn't agree to join anything," I said flatly. She clicked her pen and jotted something down on her clipboard. "Well, you live here now. That makes you a member. Non-compliance results in escalating fines." I almost laughed. Almost, but something about her tone, the calm threat behind her words, made me pause. I asked, "Who are you?" She extended a perfectly manicured hand. "Karen Evers, HOA president." Of course she was. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something about violations and citations. I stood there, surrounded by boxes, trees, and the lake I thought I owned in peace, and suddenly realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was the beginning of a war. A war I had no intention of losing. By the second morning, I was just starting to feel the peace I'd imagined. When I bought this lakeside cabin, the morning mist still hugged the water, birds chirped, and I was sipping my first coffee on the porch when I heard that dreaded sound, heels clicking on gravel. It was her again. The woman from yesterday. Same clipboard, same smug look. But this time, she wasn't alone. 2 men trailed behind her, mid-50s. Golf shirts tucked into khakis, the kind of guys who think HOA board meetings are serious power trips. They had that retired, but still in charge energy. The woman walked right up to my porch like she paid the mortgage. "Good morning," she chirped, in the kind of voice people use right before giving you a fine. "We've reviewed your setup, and unfortunately, you're already in violation of several Lakeside Preservation Association rules." I stood up slowly. "I didn't sign anything. This property isn't part of any HOA." She smiled wider. "Actually, the Lakeside Preservation Association was just established last year. As property owners in this region, we voted to form the HOA. All residences within 2 miles of Lakeside View are now under its coverage." She handed me a thick folder labeled compliance packet. I opened it. Pages and pages of rules. No exterior changes without board approval. No outdoor tools left in plain sight. No noise before 10 a.m. or after 6 p.m. No trailers. No grills. No unaproved pets. A $75 monthly community maintenance fee. It went on and on. "This must be a mistake," I said, flipping through. She tapped her clipboard. "You'll want to start with the landscaping. The wild brush behind your cabin violates the fire safety guidelines, and you can't just have tools lying around like that." "I'm renovating," I said. "This is my private property. I've read the deed. There's no HOA." One of the men stepped forward. "You'll want to comply. If not, we can escalate it to county enforcement." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were making threats based on rules they invented, and they were doing it with such confidence. It was almost like they believed they had real authority. "I'll look into this," I said curtly, folding the packet and stepping back inside. But it didn't stop there. That afternoon, I found a bright yellow notice taped to my front door. Non-compliance warning. Unauthorized. Work zone. And it was signed by Karen Wright, president of LPA. I was still fuming when a neighbor passed by and whispered, "You're not the first. Karen's been trying to control this area ever since her HOA in the city collapsed. Most folks just go along to avoid trouble. But I don't scare easy." Karen had no idea she hadn't picked a weak-willed retiree. She picked the wrong guy with the right paperwork, and I was just getting started. It was a crisp Saturday morning when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I was inside my lakeside cabin, halfway through installing curtain rods, when the noise made me pause. I glanced through the window and froze. A black and white sheriff's cruiser was pulling into my driveway. Behind it stood Karen, arms crossed. Smug smile locked onto her face like she'd just won a championship, flanked by her ever-loyal clipboard and two of her so-called HOA board members. She was practically bouncing on her toes with anticipation. I opened the door slowly, holding a screwdriver in my hand, paint stains on my shirt, and drywall, dust still clinging to my forearms. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked as the two deputies stepped out. The lead deputy was a broad-shouldered man with a calm expression, while the second was younger, flipping through some notes on his notepad. Karen stormed ahead before they could speak. "This man," she began, gesturing at me like I was a wanted criminal, "is refusing to follow HOA regulations. He's violating landscaping codes, construction noise limits, and parking ordinances. I've issued him 3 formal citations, and he hasn't responded to any of them." The officers looked at me, then at each other. The older one spoke first. "Sir, mind if we ask how you are part of the Lakeside Preservation Association?" I couldn't help but let out a chuckle. "No, officer. I did my homework before buying this property. It's not under any HOA jurisdiction. In fact, it's zoned specifically outside of it. I have the deed and zoning maps to prove it." Karen stepped forward, her tone now louder and more aggressive. "That's false. The HOA extended jurisdiction last year. We sent out notices. He's refusing to comply." The younger deputy looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, did he sign any documents agreeing to HOA terms? Any formal agreements? Property addendums?" Karen scoffed. "We don't need signatures. The HOA board passed a vote. That's binding." That's when the older deputy visibly suppressed a laugh. "Ma'am, that's not how it works. You can't just vote your way into governing someone else's private property. Property law doesn't function like a PTA meeting." I held out a manila folder. "Here's my deed, zoning certification, and a letter from the county confirming I'm not under any HOA. You're welcome to look." The younger deputy reviewed it, while the older one glanced back at Karen. "So you've been issuing citations and calling in complaints over a property you don't legally control?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "I'm doing what's best for the neighborhood. This man doesn't even follow the fence height requirements. He installed LED lights without approval. He doesn't respect the harmony of the community." The older deputy nodded slowly. "Right. But again, you have no legal authority to enforce anything here. So we're going to chalk this up as a civil misunderstanding and leave." Karen exploded. "You can't just leave. He's violating our bylaws." The younger deputy tried to de-escalate. "Ma'am, unless there's a crime in progress, this is outside our scope. Civil matters, like HOA disputes, need to be handled through proper legal channels. There's a valid HOA contract in place, which it seems there isn't." I couldn't help myself. "You hear that, Karen? You brought the law to my doorstep, but turns out the law's not on your side." She glared at me like she wanted to physically throttle me. The older deputy gave her a firm look. "If you continue to harass your neighbor, we can cite you for misuse of emergency services and trespassing." That shut her up real quick. The 2 officers nodded toward me. "Have a good day, sir. Let us know if there are any more issues." They turned and walked back toward their cruiser. I watched them drive off, but Karen didn't budge. She stood there, shaking with rage, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think this is over?" I shrugged. "I think the sheriff just told you it is." She stormed off down the gravel path, her clipboard shaking in her hand, like it was moments away from being thrown into the lake. The 2 board members, silent until now, glanced at me, then quietly followed her as their footsteps disappeared. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. That her ridiculous HOA fantasy had been crushed by cold, hard law. But deep down, I knew people like Karen didn't give up that easily. She had power in her head, a little taste of control, and she decided she ruled the world. The sheriff's visit may have been a blow to her ego, but she wasn't done, not by a long shot. What she didn't know, though, was that I wasn't done either, because I had a plan, and the next time she tried to play HOA dictator on my land, she'd find out just how dangerous it is to mess with someone who knows the law better than she does. I couldn't sleep that night. Karen had pushed me too far. The fake fines, the phony citations, the smug grin as she watched the police walk up to my cabinet, all replayed in my head like a broken record. I had bought this lakeside cabin for peace, for escape, for silence, not HOA warfare. And the worst part, I had this deep, gnawing feeling in my gut that she actually believed she was above the law. So the next morning, I grabbed a thermos of coffee, got in my truck, and headed straight to the county clerk's office. No calls, no texts, just focus. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This was about facts. I needed to know, without a shadow of doubt, if my land was truly outside of her so-called Lakeside Preservation Association. The clerk was a kind, older woman named Marlene, who wore cut-eye glasses and had a voice like a weathered librarian. "You said your address is 1147 Pine Hollow?" she asked, peering over her glasses. "Yep, right off the lake," I replied, handing her my deed and the fake HOA packet Karen had dropped off. She narrowed her eyes at the packet, flipping through it like she'd seen this game before. "Well, this isn't legally binding. And let's see here." She started typing. 10 minutes passed. Her fingers stopped. "There's no registered HOA on record for your parcel or any of the surrounding properties in your block." "None," she said, looking up. "That woman's running a phantom association, a phantom HOA. That's what it was. A ghost organization with no legal structure, no filings, no board minutes, just fear and intimidation." I asked her for copies of everything: plat maps, zoning certificates, HOA registration records or lack thereof, and a certified copy of my deed. I wanted to build a file Karen couldn't argue with, scream over, or spin. Marlene smiled. "Sounds like you've got a plan." She had no idea. As I turned to leave, she said something else that stopped me cold. "By the way, your property line actually extends 15 feet farther west than what she marked on your map." I froze. "You mean toward her cabin?" Marlene nodded. "Looks like part of her deck and fence might be on your land." I thanked her and drove straight home, but my hands were shaking the whole time. Not out of fear, out of focus. The kind of adrenaline that kicks in when you realize you're not just on defense anymore, you're on offense. Back at the cabin, I walked the boundary line with the plat map in hand. Sure enough, Marlene was right. The split rail fence Karen had built ran directly across the corner of my lot by about 12 feet. She had planted flower beds, built a deck extension, and even hung a wind chime, all on land she didn't own. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that wind chime. It swayed gently in the breeze, almost mocking me. Karen had been claiming authority over my property, while quietly trespassing on mine the whole time. That was the final straw. I called my attorney, Lisa Hardgrove. She specialized in property disputes and real estate fraud. I emailed her all the documents, including the fake HOA rules, Marlene's findings, and photos of the encroachment. "Okay," she said, "we have more than enough. Cease and desist for harassment, a boundary dispute claim, and a motion to block any HOA operations tied to your parcel. If she pushes back, we escalate to civil court." "Can we go further?" I asked. "Like, get the county to revoke any HOA rights she's pretending to have?" Lisa chuckled. "Already ahead of you." She drafted the paperwork and sent it to the local zoning board, requesting a formal declaration. No HOA could claim authority over parcels not legally bound to it. And since no HOA had been filed or voted on properly, she asked that Group be barred from even forming in the future without unanimous neighbor approval. Within 48 hours, Karen was served. I watched from my porch as the courier handed her the envelope. She opened it with her usual sneer, expecting maybe a complaint. Then her expression changed. Confusion, then anger. She turned her head slowly toward me, lips pressed in a tight line, like she couldn't believe I had the gall to fight back. But I wasn't smiling. I didn't need to. The law was smiling for me. 3 hours later, she showed up at my door. "You think this is funny?" she snapped, waving the cease and desist letter like a white flag dipped in poison. "You really think you can undo decades of work in this neighborhood?" "I don't think," I said calmly. "I know. Asterisk, she laughed bitterly. You won't win. People respect me. They trust the Lakeside Preservation Association. Asterisk, I handed her a copy of the plat map and pointed to her deck. Asterisk, this is your deck, I said. This is my land. She went quiet. And for the first time, she looked nervous. What she didn't know yet was that Lisa was preparing a second filing, a quiet title action, to resolve the property boundary dispute and formally reclaim the land her fence sat on. If successful, I could have her deck torn down, and I'd be legally allowed to charge her for trespassing damages. Asterisk, I didn't want war, but Karen had started one. Asterisk, now I was finishing it with facts, law, and leverage. By the end of the week, a judge issued a temporary injunction. Karen's group was prohibited from issuing fines, claiming authority, or holding any board activities tied to HOA governance until a formal review was complete. Asterisk, it was over. At least for now. Karen hadn't just lost her fake power trip. She was about to lose part of her property too. Asterisk, and as I stood on my porch that evening, sipping coffee under the golden lakeside sunset, I realized something. Asterisk, the peace I came here for was finally starting to return. Asterisk, but the real storm was just beginning. Karen thought she'd won. After weeks of passive-aggressive notes, phony violation notices, and bold lies about an HOA that didn't exist on record, she strutted around the lakeside like a self-crowned queen. But she didn't know I wasn't just some random guy moving into a cabin. I was someone who knew how to read a deed, call a bluff, and when necessary, go to war. Quietly. Asterisk, the night after the cops laughed her off my porch, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my porch with a whiskey in one hand, deed folder in the other, rereading every line of my property purchase. I knew I had never signed into any HOA. I even asked my realtor specifically before buying. But what Karen was doing wasn't just annoying, it was illegal. And that meant it was time to strike back. Asterisk, the next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office. I asked for every record tied to my plot of land, a few of the surrounding lots. The clerk, an older woman with glasses and a coffee mug that said I file lawsuits for breakfast, raised an eyebrow as I explained the situation. Asterisk, she says she's with the Lakeside Preservation Association, I said. Asterisk, the clerk didn't even look up. Oh boy. That told me everything. She handed me a folder thick with maps, old zoning files, and deed records. There's no HOA filed for your parcel, or any of the adjacent lots, except for down by the cul-de-sac, half a mile out. She's been pushing that fake HOA line for years. Asterisk, my stomach tightened. I asked if I could get certified copies. Asterisk, get as many as you want, she said. We've had 3 people try to sue her in small claims court already. They just didn't have the patience to follow through. Asterisk, oh, but I did. I took the documents straight to a property attorney I knew from a previous business deal. His name, T. St. Marcus, ex-military like me, and a courtroom shark in real estate disputes. I laid everything on his desk. My deed, the county files, photos of the violation notices, even a copy of the compliance packet Karen had slipped under my door. He flipped through it, then laughed. This woman's not just bluffing. She's impersonating a legal entity. That's fraud. You've got grounds to shut her entire operation down. Music to my ears. Together, we drafted a cease and desist order addressed to Karen and every board member listed in her packet. It demanded she immediately stop all attempts to enforce HOA rules on my property and any other non-HOA zoned land. It included a threat of civil suit if she failed to comply within 10 business days. But we didn't stop there. Marcus filed an injunction request with the county, asking the judge to issue a ruling that no unauthorized HOA could claim jurisdiction over properties that weren't legally bound to one. The kicker: we requested a permanent restriction on Karen's ability to form or represent any homeowners association in our area without verified legal filings. We weren't just fighting back. We were about to wipe her imaginary empire off the map legally. 1 week later, the cease and desist letter was served. I'll never forget the moment Karen got it. I was on my porch staining wood panels when a process server in sunglasses and a leather jacket walked up her driveway. She was in the yard holding court with 2 of her board members. When he handed her the envelope, she opened it casually. Her face dropped. "What is this?" she yelled across the lake, waving the papers at me. I smiled and waved back. She screamed, "You can't do this. You're just a new guy with a toolbox." That toolbox, by the way, contained more law and logic than she could ever handle. 3 days later, my lawyer got a call. It was one of Karen's so-called board members, a man named Roger. Turns out, Karen never told them they weren't legally registered. He wanted out before the lawsuit hit. We offered him immunity if he signed an affidavit confirming everything. Karen made up the HOA, fabricated the rules, and never got a single homeowner's signed consent. He signed it that afternoon. Then came the court hearing. Karen actually showed up with a binder of fake documents and a chip on her shoulder. She called herself president of the Lakeside Preservation Authority. My lawyer stood, showed the judge the zoning records, the official plat maps, and Roger's signed affidavit. The judge barely took 5 minutes to rule. There is no legal HOA here, he said, looking directly at Karen, and any attempts to enforce one will be met with contempt of court. Then he signed our injunction. The ruling made it illegal for Karen or anyone in her group to create or enforce any HOA regulations in our area without county approval, legal filings, and the consent of 100% of affected property owners. Karen stood there speechless. For once, the queen of fake power had no rules left to hide behind. And the best part, that same day, Marcus handed me a certified letter for Karen, a demand to remove her fence, which we discovered encroached nearly 6 feet onto my property line. If she didn't move it in 14 days, we'd have it removed at her expense and charge her for damages. Suddenly, she was the one facing violation threats. And this time, they were real. This wasn't just a personal win. It was a message to every fake authority figure who uses fear and lies to control others. You mess with the wrong person's land, they'll turn the law into a sledgehammer. And Karen, she was about to feel every pound of it. Karen thought she was untouchable. Even after being served legal documents, she didn't back down. In fact, she doubled down, posting even more HOA flyers around the lake, warning neighbors about new fines for unauthorized deck furniture, and threatening revocation of access rights to the lake trail. The only problem, she had no legal authority to do any of it. Word spread fast that I was fighting back. At first, the neighbors were skeptical. Karen had bullied them into submission for years. She'd threatened to fine an elderly couple for using a fire pit. Told a single mom her porch plants were not. One guy even admitted he'd paid over $1,200 in fake HOA dues over the last 2 years just to avoid trouble. But once they saw the official court documents I'd distributed, the tone shifted. People started to get angry. Not just at Karen but at themselves for being manipulated for so long. That week, Karen organized a so-called emergency HOA meeting at the Lakeside Community Center. Only 2 people showed up, her and one of her board members, Steve, who looked like he wanted to disappear. Halfway through her rant about preserving community standards, I walked in with a county sheriff and my attorney. Eyes widened. "You can't be here. This is private HOA business." The sheriff held up the court order. "Ma'am, per county order number 48217B. The Lakeside Preservation Association is not recognized as a legal entity and must cease all operations immediately. You are in violation of this order." Steve literally backed out of the room and walked off. Karen, red-faced and defiant, crossed her arms. "This is harassment. I've lived here for 12 years. This community needs standards." My attorney stepped forward and calmly said, "Karen, your authority was never legal. You could not create an HOA on unzoned private land without consent and contract. You forged governance." Karen stammered, trying to change the subject, but the sheriff cut in. "Ma'am, failure to comply will result in charges harassment, false representation of authority, and property intimidation. Do you understand?" That silence, that was Karen realizing she wasn't in charge anymore. The sheriff made her walk out with him and personally remove the HOA notice. Signs she'd posted around the lake. Each one peeled off was another nail in the coffin of her so-called regime. Neighbors watched from porches and decks. One man clapped slowly as she passed. Someone else muttered, "About damn time." By the end of the week, the fake HOA website was gone. The signage was gone. And Karen, she was done. But I wasn't. I filed one last document, a formal restriction, with the county barring any future HOA formation on my property line, and submitted it. For public record, Karen had ruled through fear. I'd ended her reign with facts, law, and backbone. And the next time someone tries to claim power they never had, they better bring more than a clipboard. The wind rustled the pines as I sipped my coffee on the front porch, watching the sun rise over the still waters of the lake. For the first time in weeks, the silence was intense. It was peaceful. No clipboard-wielding tyrant. No fake notices taped to my door, just nature, freedom, and the steady calm of a battle well won. Karen was gone. She held out longer than I expected, filing counterclaims, sending angry emails, even threatening to escalate to her state-level connections. My attorney shut her down at every turn. Once the court injunction came through, it was game over. Her so-called HOA was declared legally non-existent. Any future attempt to enforce its rules could now be considered harassment or fraud. And that was just the start. The judge ordered Karen to take down every HOA sign, stop collecting fake dues, and issue written apologies to everyone she'd intimidated. Of course, she didn't. So the court added fines. Her authority crumbled. Her followers vanished. The fake board members turned on her like rats, abandoning a sinking ship. Then came the final blow. Turns out, her backyard deck extended 5 feet over my property line. My attorney had it surveyed and sent a formal notice. Either tear it down or pay me monthly rent for land use. She didn't respond. The county did. They gave her 30 days to comply. She lasted 18. One morning, I watched from my porch as a for sale sign was hammered into her front lawn. A week later, a moving truck rolled in, and just like that, Karen was history. And the best part, neighbors who once stayed silent started showing up. One brought me fresh pie. Another offered to help stain my porch. One elderly gentleman admitted Karen had threatened to sue him for grass overgrowth. He'd lived here 22 years. "We've been waiting for someone to stand up to her," he said quietly. "Thank you. I didn't do it for applause. I did it because it was mine, this land, this cabin, this peace. No one had the right to take it from me. Especially not someone hiding behind phony rules and a power trip." Before heading back inside, I walked down to the front gate and hung up a small wooden sign I had carved by hand. Private property, not part of any HOA. It didn't need to be flashy, just honest, permanent, like the pine trees, like the silence, like the law that finally worked the way it should. And now I live free, not just from Karen, but from fear, from intrusion, and from anyone who ever thought they could own what they didn't earn. Because this cabin isn't just a home, it's a statement. And it says here, we don't ask for permission to live in peace.